Welcome to the Astrology Star Sisters Talk Over Tea. Today we're going to talk about Mercury Retrograde in Virgo, and my guest is Madam Simon. Hi Simon, how you doing?
Pretty good. Little warm here in Seattle, but good other than that.
Well, it's good to have you
How are
back.
you?
Oh, I'm doing good. Staying cool and relaxing and enjoying the sunshine, but staying out of it because I got a little sunburn the other day. So,
Right.
okay, so let's get to the Mercury Retrograde. But we're going to start out with how to get a hold of Madam Simon, and you can reach her through her website at iconalchemy.com, and you can reach me through my website at alightpath.com. So Mercury is going to station retrograde on August 4th at 9:57 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time in Seattle. And a lot of people talk about Mercury retrogrades. And what would you have to say about Mercury retrograde? Because I know a lot of people talk about like, don't do all this stuff. And do you agree or disagree?
I think that in particular, the things I would be concerned about not doing under Mercury retrograde would be more a matter of be careful when you sign contracts. Um, don't make big purchases. Sometimes, of course, you have to do it right then. You can't delay something. And I don't think that, we should be scared to do something under a Mercury retrograde. But I do think that we need to be more diligent about assessing what's actually going on, paying attention to the details, especially with a Mercury retrograde in Virgo, which is very detail oriented and therefore is going to want us to really pay attention to those details. Um, so, so yeah, that would be the main concern.
Thank you for sharing that. And I would add that if you do have to sign a contract, read it a few times and maybe, see if you can take it home and then go back the next day and sign it perhaps. It's like, don't rush into things. Mine is always don't make impulsive purchases because a lot of times you'll regret that you made that impulsive purchase. We always need things. Do the research beforehand to make sure that's what you really want.
Yeah.
Okay, um, so Mercury will be retrograde from August 4th to the 27th. Mercury travels between the worlds. Mercury stations retrograde 3 to 4 times a year. This shadow phase will be from July 17th through September 12th. So we could already be feeling some of the Mercury getting ready to go retrograde already in our lives. Mercury is a personal planet. It's about communication, siblings, short distance travel, quick thinking, the mind, and intellect. Do you have anything to add to that, Simon?
So, for those of us who were born under Mercury retrograde, hi, I'm one of them. Um, the shadow phase is actually when we're more likely to experience the Mercury retrograde effects that most people associate with Mercury retrograde. Um, I know that for myself, typically when Mercury retrograde is happening, um, I feel great. I feel like things are coming around to my way of thinking. Um, but during the shadow periods is when I tend to experience, the technological snafus and miscommunications. So
Okay. So we're going to talk about the Sabian symbol associated with this Mercury retrograde, and the Sabian symbols were channeled in 1925 by spiritualist medium Elsie Wheeler, and with the assistance of Mark Edmund Jones. And there's one symbol for each degree of the astrological wheel, so it's 360 of them, and you round up the number to the next number. Just to make them correspond. So, do you want to talk about this one or do you want me to read it?
well, I can read it. It's at 5 degrees of Virgo, a man becoming aware of nature spirits and normally unseen spiritual agencies, with the keynote being the opening of new levels of consciousness. In the first of this sequence of 5 symbols, we see the individual seeking to bring out of everyday contacts a consciousness of significant form and meaning. Now, as the sequence ends, a further stage of realization is shown in its initial and relatively primitive character. The consciousness is gradually reaching beyond physical characteristics and becoming aware of energy processes, i.e., of the dynamism of forces which externalize themselves as life forms. This is the last stage of the 35-fold sequence, 31st five-fold sequence of phases of the cyclic process of consciousness. The mind, in its objectivizing and analytical character, always tends to give name and form, nama and rupa in Sanskrit, to that which it contacts as energy process. It images forth energy or feeling, relating it to more or less familiar sense experience. We call this imagination. I don't know who this person is referring to as we, because I don't call that imagination, but
I would call it
paying
paying attention to the instincts and premonitions or feelings or sensing something. I would pay attention to that.
I would also relate it to kinesthesia. Kinesthesia is like it's kind of like a way of knowing things through our physical feelings. So, for some people, myself included, when we think of psychic phenomenon, we actually experience it in terms of things like a tingling in one's fingers or one's, some other parts of one's body, or a certain warmth or coldness. Those kinds of sensory perceptions are how we get our, unseen or hidden knowledge from, as opposed to, say, somebody who maybe is experiencing what do you call it, clairsentience, where they just know something. That's more heady. Kinesthesia is more body oriented and would be very much associated with Virgo's form of psychic knowing.
Thank you for sharing that. Okay, and leading up to this Mercury retrograde, on the same day, we have a new moon in Leo. So I thought it would be very appropriate for us to talk about this new moon in Leo about 14 hours before Mercury goes retrograde. So Leo is a fixed fire sign. It's ruled by the sun, and the animal associated with the sign Leo is a lion. Leo is very creative, fiery, passionate, and confident. It initiates fresh starts, makes desires and goals known, growth, new cycles, reinvent yourself, and fun and joy. Would you add anything to that?
So there can be an almost childlike expression, creative expression with Leo, because, it's operating from the heart with a sense of vitality and passion, being associated with the sun. The sun is the core of our solar system. And in astrology, it's our core sense of purpose, our core sense of self. And of course, we can also relate it to courage, that which the cowardly lion was looking for, or more importantly, growing into. And it's interesting because people a lot of times will think, oh, Leos, want to be right in the spotlight. Well, Leo is actually learning how to be in the spotlight, which is a little bit different. And keep in mind that we all have all signs within us. So in some part of each of us, there is that Leo part that wants to be seen, that believes it deserves to be seen, and then is trying to figure out how to step forward and do that. And our different Leo sides will behave about that a little bit differently. For some people, their Leo side shows up in, say, their career, or for some people, it shows up in their family life. I have Leo in the 11th house, so for me, it shows up with friendships. And there's that need to, for me in particular, to spread the warmth of the sun with friends. That's how my Leo shows up. So I think it's worthwhile, especially when we're looking at a new moon in Leo, to see what new beginnings we can have when it comes to sharing generously, which is very much associated with Leo, the warmth of our Leo selves, the warmth of our inner sun.
Thank you. I like that. So the Leo new moon is at 12 degrees Leo and 34 minutes on August 4th at 7:13 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time. And in this chart, it's in the second house because it will change depending on your location. And so we have an earth and a water grand trine in the chart. Do you want to start?
Well, the Earth's grand trine is not a full Earth grand trine because it's one arm of it is Pluto in the first degree of Aquarius, as Pluto is heading back into Capricorn. But by degree, it is trine to both of those other planets. One of those is Uranus, and the other one is Juno. And I find this kind of interesting. Juno very much relates to our oaths and our personal contracts and our the connections that we have to people that are almost, say, institutional. We look at Juno as the queen of heaven, married to Jupiter, and not necessarily, in a lovey-dovey kind of romance with him, but rather sticking with him as, that they, as the rulers of the heavens, were an institution, and therefore needed to find ways to compromise and deal with each other's less than pleasant behaviors and and negotiate through difficult experiences together. And when you combine that with Pluto and Uranus, of course, is the great rebel, the great change maker, is associated with revolution. Pluto also has some associations with revolution, but it's a matter of dealing with what is rotten and corrupt and festering, and that needs to then be purged and resolved in some way, transformed. And so I find that to be a really interesting grand trine there. We're starting to see with Pluto in Aquarius, we are seeing what is perhaps in need of transformation in terms of our understanding of consensus reality. Aquarius is fixed air, and so it's ideas that have solidified into what we consider to be the facts of existence, except facts are not really set in stone. They're what we agree are the facts, until we find out new data that changes that. And so Pluto in Aquarius is starting to dredge up what is festering and rotten within our understanding of consensus reality. And then Uranus is, of course, like, oh, let's change that. And Juno here then is, well, if we're going to make these changes, we need to pay attention to some details. And, be precise about our contractual agreements and honor our oaths down to the details. And if there's a problem with those details, then we each need to agree that there's a problem with those details before we go changing them. We cannot just rewrite the contract without both parties agreeing. And so she's kind of there to keep both of those outers honest. Now, I mean, outer planets, they change things over time. They're generational in their force, and they tend to transform whatever they touch from the ground up. So they are also having that transformative impact on Juno. But even though she may be a little old asteroid, I still think she's kind of mighty. She's still the Queen of Heaven. and and she's going to be reminding them that, hey, y'all need to pay attention to some things that you have been overlooking.
Well, this just kind of reinforces that there's some change. And I would say if we don't start making changes, the changes will happen for us. But there's also transformation going on, or looking at things and seeing, do I want to keep going this direction? Is this sustainable? Do we need to, renegotiate or rework? And, there's somewhat of a communication component to it, of how we even partner with nature, or how we treat the earth, how we treat each other. I mean, that's beautifully said. I like that.
And keep in mind, this Juno is ruled by that Mercury that's in the process of stationing retrograde.
Exactly. And then we have a water grand trine. And one point is the ascendant and the part of fortune. And the ascendant does move pretty quickly, because for each few minutes it'll move quickly. And the next point is the midheaven, which it moves quickly too, of Neptune conjunct the midheaven. And then it's with Pallas Athena about having a strategy. But since it's an event, that energy will last a little bit longer than if it was just a passing transit for a moment. So since it's a new moon, it lasts a little bit longer. But we'll see later on when we get to the Mercury retrograde that aspect isn't even there anymore. But Neptune, our visions and dreams, and the ascendant, I think of ourselves and our bodies. And then Pallas Athena, strategy, and she's like a female warrior, so to speak. So it's like, is the dreams that I've had, are they going to manifest, or do I have to make new dreams? What would you like to add to that?
Well, I mean, Athena, Pallas Athena, is the Greek goddess of wisdom. So there certainly is that need to pay attention to the lessons we are learning from our experiences, and in particular in relation to Neptune. I would say that is also the lessons that we are learning from our delusions and illusions, from the places where we have felt deceived, from the places where we have been given reason to distrust. Note that Scorpio tends to react pretty poorly to lies and deceit, and can lash out in response to that. And so I think that in this context, that Pallas is really primed to see where Neptune wants to lead us down the garden path. Now, this being, that ascendant and part of fortune, they're pretty specific to this region, to the West Coast. And so I think that, this particular configuration will have more impact for people on the West Coast of the United States. But that's still a pretty wide swath of territory. And we should not discount the butterfly effect.
Exactly. And even like, being following somebody that you think is speaking truth, or, selling a product or a job, etc.
Or an
Okay.
ideal, a big vision, because that's what Neptune is associated with. So, I would very much think of this more in terms of like somebody who, is trying to get me on board with a plan that is big and long term, and that can affect lots of things, and it affects my beliefs and all of that. So this would be a time to really, question in particular your spiritual leaders, but also community leaders in general. Anybody who talks big, can they back it up?
Thank you. Okay, and then we have some connecting sextiles here. So starting at kind of the top, we have the North Node sextile to Mars, and Mars sextile to the Sun and Moon, and then their sextile to the South Node, and then sextile to the vertex. And since I had the vertex point in there, I just added that in, which not every astrologer uses the vertex point. So lots of times these planets are, in cooperation with each other to accomplish something. And since they're associated with the nodes and the new moon, the sun and moon are involved in this too. And, it's like, I would say be specific with what you ask for at this new moon. If you ask for things, write it down, maybe light a candle, even if you spend 3 minutes, having a little ritual. And it could even be a battery operated candle. It doesn't have to be one that you light. So or you can just take a moment and go outside and meditate for 3 minutes, or if you have longer, go ahead. What would you like to say?
Well, so the sun and moon are trine the north node. I mean, when we're looking at like a series of sextiles, some of those points are going to be trine each other as well. So that sun and moon are trine the north node, which I like as a both a new beginning thing, but also a getting things going in the right direction kind of mode. The nodes I look at as our karmic arc, with the south node being where we've come from, the north node being where we're going to. Both are important. It's not like we're going to, completely leave the south node behind. That's where we're coming from. It's what has shaped us. But we're learning more in the direction of the north node. And so having the new moon trine that north node then suggests that the new beginning of this particular lunar cycle is oriented toward learning new things, particularly when it comes to our executive function, because Aries is associated with that north node in Aries, and how are the choices that we are making in alignment with our hearts, with our passion, with our vitality, with our core sense of purpose. And then we also have here Mars trine the south node, Mars in Gemini. So Mars in Gemini gets things done by talking about them and by gathering information. So also of a learning kind of placement, which makes it interesting then in the context of this Mars being trine the south node, because that suggests we're learning what to let go of. We're learning what we no longer need. We're learning what social mores are not serving us, since this is the south node in Libra. What relationships are not healthy for us anymore. And perhaps, I could be wrong about this, but I think this is pretty true. What injustices we are no longer willing to tolerate, because Libra has an association with justice.
I like that.
Also, it should be noted also, like that Mars opposite the vertex, again, that's kind of specific to this area in terms of like how the vertex is calculated. But the vertex is a twist of fate. It's like a person or a place or an object, something that our fate turns around. And when I see that pretty closely opposite that Mars, then that suggests that our actions may turn on a dime.
I like that. And you said about like relationships that don't, I think you said no longer service. Well, it could just be relationships or groups that we've outgrown. They could have grown in one direction, we grow in another. So kind of has a double meaning there, or they're both similar. So
yeah, and I mean, there are so many, we meet so many people over the course of our lives, and we can learn so many things from so many different people that we meet, but that doesn't mean that we spend the rest of our lives hanging out with them. There are people who I have met at various points in my life who I've only known for the course of that one day, who have taught me a lot, but I'm not still hanging around them. Our paths have gone in different directions. And that is perfectly okay. So I can, this doesn't have to be rancorous, is what I'm saying. I can have gratitude for people who I have met who I no longer am spending regular time with. And so, if you recognize that it's time to move along on the path, remember that Mars is ruling that North Node, right? So if it's time to move along on the path, and that means that you leave other people to their devices somewhere else, thank them, be grateful to them, and then go do what you need to do.
Exactly. Thank you. Okay, now we're going to get back to the Mercury stationing retrograde. And again, it stations retrograde on August 4th at 9:57 p.m. and it'll station direct on August 28th. And the aspects we're going to look at is a finger of God or a yod, and a T-square, and an Earth, Grand Trine, and Kite. So do you want to start?
So the finger of God here is Venus has just moved into Virgo at the time of Mercury station retrograde. So that Venus is being ruled by that Mercury, and it has is having all this pressure put on her by Pluto in Aquarius and by Neptune in Pisces. And it's interesting, this is Pluto in an air sign. So Pluto having to do with compulsion or obsession or intensity within our thoughts. But also, again, hearkening back to what I said before, within our understanding of consensus reality. And then Neptune, who is, hopes and dreams and ideals and illusions and delusions and sometimes outright deceptions, in Pisces, a sign associated with our emotions. And that's putting a lot of pressure on Venus, who is newly entered into the sign of her fall in Virgo. She does not have the same resources in Virgo that she is used to having in Pisces, where she is exalted, or in either of her domiciles in Libra or in Taurus. and it's almost like she is being expected to behave in a very different way from how she would like to behave. And since she's at that 0 degree, that's like that's a space where she's just like, whoa, I just got here, why are you putting all this pressure on me? And the guy who's supposed to, guy, gal, Mercury is hermaphroditic. The person who is supposed to be giving me the rules to let me know how I'm supposed to behave in this place has just gotten turned around and is retracing their steps. So our relationships may feel like we are, we may feel like there are expectations of us that we don't know how to live up to. There is a danger of emotional manipulation going on. There is a danger of sort of societal expectations that we feel a lot of pressure under, and in particular, a lot of pressure to be perfect, because perfection is the shadow side of Virgo. And where Pluto shows up in particular, our shadow sides come out to play. And so Pluto, with that shadowy, this kind of shadowy information, I guess one could say, from Aquarius, and societal rules, these rules that Venus is like, I don't quite understand what's going on here. That's putting a lot of pressure on Venus, on our relationships and our connective principle, and our ability to enjoy the good things in life, to get all these little details perfect when we just walked into the place and we have no idea what's going on. So,
well, do you think Mercury's going to help Venus out, since Mercury's moving retrograde and applying to a conjunction with Venus? I think, and Mercury goes between the worlds, because Mercury goes and visits Pluto in the underworld. That, yes, it could be a little destabilizing, so to speak, to begin with, but then Mercury might swoop in and assist.
I think that the first day or two of the Mercury retrograde is going to be a little bewildering for Miss Venus. So we might have some fumbles in our social situation, or some bad hair days, some awkward dressing. Because Venus governs fashion and beauty and all those things as well. I would be very interested to see what happens for people financially under this influence, because Venus does govern wealth. So again, if one is making big purchases or investments, examine the fine print.
Well, it makes me think of, it might be pajama day everywhere you go, and bad head, I think they call it, like you just got out of bed and you didn't brush your hair, and you might think it looks very fashionable, and then like, oh my God, what did I just do?
Or conversely, that one is spending so much time like trying to get it perfect, trying to get it right, that it actually winds up kind of awful. It doesn't automatically mean things will be bad. It just means that that we need to be kinder to ourselves during this time, particularly when it comes to, again, some questionable fashion choices.
Oh, I like that. It's good to laugh. So then we have a cardinal T-square with the North Node and this opposite the South Node, and square to Pholus and Ceres. So do you want to speak to that?
So Pholus and Ceres at the bendings of the nodes. So this is interesting because this combination actually bookends this retrograde, because We see Pholus and Ceres here are retrograde. And I know, I don't remember about Pholus, but I know that Ceres is going to station direct during the Mercury retrograde. And then we'll be back at this position, squaring the nodes, at the bendings of the nodes, when Mercury is heading back into direct territory. So Ceres relates to our ability to nurture and nourish ourselves and others. Ceres, of course, being the goddess Ceres. So relating to cereal, relating to agriculture and the growth of grains, but also relating to Demeter, and thus the Eleusinian mysteries, and Demeter's grief over Persephone, when Persephone got swooped down into the underworld. And so, Demeter responded to the abduction of her daughter with an extreme grief, plunging the mortal world into winter. And so while Ceres can be nourishing, Ceres can also be harsh. Ceres can be cold. Ceres has a hunger that needs to be satisfied. And in this case, that is a hunger in Capricorn for us to reach our goals, particularly material goals, particularly career goals, or goals regarding our reputation, our standing in the world. Even if that standing is, I am just a janitor, but I take pride in my janitorial work, and I want to be the best janitor I can be, right? So that would be that Ceres hunger then in Capricorn for a janitor. Or, it applies to anywhere else where we are trying to be not just our best selves, but our most achieving selves. And the problem is that when our material achievements are not in alignment with our karmic path, with those achievements, which sometimes can really be at odds with material achievement. If you're supposed to be engaged in some deep spiritual work, while there are certainly times that can coincide with your material path, there are other times when it can be a detour. And finding the balance between those paths, I think, is one of the biggest challenges for us as physical beings in a world that seems to be increasingly oriented toward, the profit motive and all of that. And yet there's some deep spiritual needs that do need to be addressed. How do we find the balance between the two? I'm a pagan person, so I like to believe that that spirit and matter are not divorced from each other. But still, in the society that we have, trying to combine both successfully and navigate the status quo while doing that is tough. It should be noted that Pholus is one of the centaurs. Pholus can relate to hidden talents. Pholus was also a haruspex, the kind of diviner who does, somebody who does divination through examining animal entrails. A practice which I'm glad there is perhaps less of now. But it is, associated with this idea of trying to foretell the future, trying to head bad possibilities off the pass, trying to mitigate difficult situations and potential roadblocks. And so, yeah, this T square, I think, is potentially challenging. It goes, especially because it's effectively, like I said, bookending this Mercury retrograde. And I think that themes of this T square are going to be accompanying us throughout the Mercury retrograde.
Well, and I would suspect that people that grow food, whether it's farmers or someone in their backyard, that they're, things that have worked in the past, is that still going to work? Because, we have hotter temperatures, we're having floods. In Pennsylvania, it snowed the other day. It didn't stick or anything, but it was snowing just a few days ago. So, there's these things to reconsider and see, how we're going to work with this weather and extreme tornadoes, etc.
And hailstorms and all of that, right? Something that I just remembered is not on this chart, but if I remember correctly, so Hygeia is one of the asteroids, one of the goddess asteroids, and at this point will be in, if I remember correctly, will be in Taurus, trining that Mercury and that Ceres. Note that Ceres and Pholus are trine that Mercury. So I really feel like there's going to be some very practical issues that we have to re-examine during this Mercury retrograde. And Hygeia in particular deals with matters of health and sanitation. So it would be wise for us to pay attention to our environments in connection with our goals, and how are our environments affecting our goals, and how are our goals affecting both our environments and our health.
That's great advice. I like that. So then we have a Earth Grand Trine and a Kite, or you could say it's just a kite, but I like to call it both. So we have Juno, and we talked about this Earth Grand Trine for the new moon, and then it kites off to Neptune, and it's a little different direction than in the other chart. So the release point, so to speak, so you don't get stuck in the groove, is that Neptune. So our visions and dreams and imagination, but like you said before, to not get stuck in delusion, perhaps. Do you want to say anything more about this trine?
Well, the kite in particular, having Neptune at its head, says that we can be led, guided, or actually pulled, I should say, because really the steering point would be at the tail, and that would be Miss Juno there. But with Neptune up at the head, I think that on one hand, there is the potential to fly high with our visions, with our hopes, with our dreams. And at the same time, it would be wise for us to, not get too far out into the ether. On the plus side, because this is, Juno and Uranus in Earth, they can help to ground us. But that Pluto in Aquarius is pretty heady. So,
Well,
yeah,
and Juno might not
discernment
look
is
like she
important
has
here.
all that power, but being the tail, she kind of does have more power. So it's like she's kind of behind the scenes. It's like, well, let's see what you're going to do, but I'll rein you back in.
Or yeah, like the rudder of a ship, actually, in terms of determining, like, okay, Neptune's like, right there at the prow. Neptune is the one pulling us along, But Juno was like, oh, no, we're course correcting. Here we are. We're course corrected. You know, you don't get to lead us straight out into the open ocean just yet.
I love that.
We're going to tootle around the islands for a little while.
That sounds like fun. Anything else you'd like to say about the kite?
No.
Okay, then Mercury stations direct on August 28th at 2:14 p.m. at 21 degrees of Leo in 24 minutes. But also remember, the shadow lasts until September 12th. So here's a chart when Mercury stations direct in Leo, because she was in Virgo, but now, or there's no gender to Mercury, so Mercury's now in Leo. Just retrace the steps, and we start out with a cardinal cross with the moon opposite Ceres and Pholus, and the nodes are involved and they're opposite each other to form a grand cross. Yeah. So what would you like to say about this grand cross?
Well, I mean, I did talk a fair amount about Ceres and Pholus, but now with the moon involved, that adds this kind of instinctive, unconscious, potentially reactive element to this. The moon is where we do things before we've thought about it. I mean, we could certainly associate the moon with emotions, but it is very much that kind of we're going on autopilot with the moon. And this is a fairly potent moon because it's the moon in the home sign of Cancer. And all grand crosses, we can feel like we are going in multiple directions at once. But with the cardinal grand cross, the whole thing about cardinal signs is that they start things, and they want to get stuff off the ground. And so there is this power to them. Each of the cardinal points in the year are, the equinoxes and the solstices. And so those are initiating a new season. And that takes a lot of energy. And so each of the cardinal signs then has a lot of energy to put towards starting things. Now, when you've got all 4 cardinal signs involved, when they are in a grand cardinal cross like that, it's like you are being pulled very strongly in 4 directions at once. And so if you don't want to get quartered, you need to be able to find a way to kind of be as stable and patient and discerning about this stuff as possible. Exercise some good discernment. Now, we will note here, we've got the sun at a semi-sextile to the moon and the south node. The sun's right in between the two of them, at the midpoint between them. And so there is our discernment. When we look at a semi-sextile, it is where the planet in the previous sign is going to. And so there's like some tension there, but it is also that okay, in this case, we are going to attempt to move out of the unconscious reactivity and into some consciousness regarding what is going on. And note that sun is in Virgo and is therefore ruled by that Mercury and has mutual reception with that Mercury by sign, not by degree. There's no like aspect between them that's giving them that.
And I would say too, like with Mercury retrograde, it's like, do not overcommit yourself. And so,
Yep.
with this cardinal cross on the day that it goes direct, you might be starting to have people ask for things, or there's demands, or, asking to work on something. It's like, be careful what you commit to, and that you don't overcommit yourself.
Yeah.
Or to say, well, I
Definitely.
can do that, but I won't be able to get to it for a month, or whatever time frame would work for you. Did you want to say anything more?
You also note that Mercury is trine both Chiron and Eris. And Chiron can can relate to our wounding, and Chiron and Aries can relate then to how do Aries traits, where are they not serving us well, or where are they adding to our discomfort. And in this case, I mean, Aries is associated with executive function, with the ability to get stuff done.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that backs up what you're saying about don't overcommit, because Aries like totally will rush in where angels fear to tread and be like, I want to be the big damn hero. I want to save the baby from the burning building, and help these people who just got in a car wreck, and and do all this other stuff. I'm gonna help everybody. I'm gonna save the day. But if you only have so much energy to save the day because you're actually being called to pay attention to things on 4 different fronts, there's only so much you can do. And it does nobody any good if you collapse in the middle of it. Also, that Eris being involved, Eris is discord. Eris is, she's got some warrior kind of capability. She is sextile Mars, it looks like. So they're reinforcing each other's tendency to perhaps get into a bit of mischief. And that Mars is ruled by that Mercury again. So, yeah, I feel like there could be some tension and discord and frustration that shows up here if we are not careful to be discerning about what's going on.
Absolutely. Okay, then we have a Thor's hammer, and Pholus and Ceres are square the north node, and they're sesquiquadrate to that Mercury. So Mercury's got a lot of tension with this Thor's hammer. Would you like to talk about that?
Yeah, the Taurus hammer can put survival level pressure on whatever planet is at the apex, so that we can really feel like we're under a lot of pressure to be discerning, like we're under a lot of pressure to pay attention to what's going on, and since it's Mercury in Leo, that we're under a lot of pressure to speak in a way that conveys leadership, to show up and put our best foot forward with how we're communicating. And that can be difficult when we're perhaps a little scrambled by all this other stuff that's going on. My inclination when looking at how to mitigate complicated circumstances, when looking at how to communicate about, where we might have to drop the ball, is radical honesty. To be in a space of I am showing up and shining like that Leo is asking Mercury to do. But I'm doing so from the standpoint of admitting that I'm not perfect, and admitting that there are areas where I may be struggling. And rather than looking at that as like the poor me's, that's actually a way to take ownership of the situation. To say, no, really, here, I'm not perfect. I'm struggling with this. I may need some help, or I may need a rain check on something. Um, and and with that sun in Virgo, they having that mutual reception with that Mercury, I feel like that's actually a way to be very conscientious and to lead by being conscientious without getting overly into your ego about it.
Well, and I would double check that if somebody's communicating something to you, that that's what they really meant, or that they said it clearly, or that you understood it clearly. So I would kind of double check on that a little bit, because you might hear something and go, what? That doesn't make sense.
Right. Right.
Okay. And then that Mercury is close enough to Vesta that we have a T square with Uranus and the ascendant here. And so we know that T squares often ask us to make some adjustments. So around the communication, and with Uranus being involved, perhaps we could really say something that we wish we hadn't said, and we can't take it back. So it's like, try to be careful what you communicate. Use the wisdom of that palace with the ascendant, to try to, be wise with what you say, or count to 10 before you say something. What would you like to say?
Well, note that Pallas is really tightly opposing that Uranus. And Uranus wants to liberate us, whereas Pallas is aware of all of the deep, dark, intense stuff of humanity by being in Scorpio, which has emotional awareness of the less than savory things that humans get up to. And so I feel like there's this kind of push pull between what we want to, again, almost like a Plutonian influence, in the sense of what do we want to get rid of, what do we want to purge, what needs to be cleaned up, where do we need to clean up our act. Vesta, or not Vesta, sorry, Pallas in Scorpio is going to play things close to the chest. There can be some distrustful energy there. Now that Vesta that you mentioned, I don't really feel like she's that close to Mercury, but she is conjoining the sun. And the sun and Mercury are in mutual reception, with Vesta sandwiched between them. And Vesta is very much about, she governs the hearth and home, the sacred flame. Vesta, specifically the Roman version of the deity, also relates to this kind of sacred public space that is the heart of the republic, that is the heart of the society. And her being with the sun, that is the heart of our solar system. I do feel like she can become part of the mitigation. Her and the sun and Mercury, all of them can become part of the mitigation for the areas where we distrust what can seem very radical, what can seem like it's breaking apart the structures in our society that we have relied upon. Okay, I mean, that's something that Uranus in Taurus has definitely been doing some of. Disrupting supply chains and all of that. That's a Uranus and Taurus thing. But also, showing us these natural disasters and whatnot. Yeah, I again, I feel like that goes back to that need for radical honesty. I feel like it goes back to the need to recognize what do we value, and what gives us life and light, and our inner fire, what gives us our sense of purpose. And it may not be what we have previously thought. Going back to, you know, some of the earlier stuff that challenges our awareness of a consensus reality, that Pluto and that Neptune that we're having that yod with Mercury at the start of this retrograde, that Neptune is now opposing that Vesta. And so it can potentially cloud, but it can also elevate. It can also show us some really powerful spiritual insights. And I think that can be part of what helps to guide us in this situation.
Well, it sounds like with this Mercury retrograde, we have a lot of things to consider and reevaluate, and that there's probably some changes coming.
Yeah.
And then,
especially with Uranus in the mix.
and then we have the Grand Trine in Kite, and it's with Venus and Uranus and Pluto down to Neptune. Mm-hmm. So, you know, Neptune is that release point, and we kind of talked about this a little bit before about Juno being the udder, but now Venus is the udder, or the rudder, not the udder.
Yeah.
So I don't think there's a whole lot more to say with this one, but maybe you have something you want to add to it. I'm not sure.
Well, I do find that, you know, with Venus there, then remember at the beginning of the retrograde, Venus was in kind of a more confused state. But now Venus has come through to the final degree of Virgo. She has learned how to be in service through relationship. She has learned how to attend to details and slowly perfect our relationships over time without devolving into perfectionism and being nitpicky and endlessly critical. She has learned how to do Venus stuff with far fewer resources than she is used to. She can't just, you know, waft out the pheromones and draw the good stuff to her. She has to like sit here and, you know, kind of fuss and pay attention to all these little details and deal with things on a very material level. But, you know, this is the Venus who shows love by bringing you your favorite cup of tea. And I really like that in this configuration because that is the reminder that that Neptunian higher vision needs some grounding in the day-to-day ways that we treat each other. You know, that we can be in service to each other as humanity and the planet are going through big, intense changes. You know, we can help each other out, whether it's through mutual aid or through, you know, just offering to do some babysitting for somebody or, you know, help a sick friend or whatever. So I really like seeing Venus there. I think this is a really great repetition of this kite, you know, that has been kind of subtly influencing this Mercury retrograde throughout its cycle with, you know, Juno starting out there and now Venus. I think it's actually rather kind and sweet.
Well, that's great. And she'll be ingressing into Libra, one of her home signs, in the next day or so after this.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we'll join that Juno. I should point that out. Yeah.
And then we have a mystical rectangle, which is 2 points that are opposite, but they connect with trines and sextiles. I always think of a mystical rectangle of having a gift to give us. Now, how big or generous the gift is, that depends on, one, the planets that are involved and what's ready to be opened. And so we have it with Venus to the Ascendant and Pallas, to Neptune and to Uranus. And we know that they've been pretty active in the chart already. So they're still active within this. Do you want to say anything more about the mystical rectangle?
So the mystic rectangle, like you said, it's two oppositions that are connected by these sextiles and trines. And those oppositions are integrating things that are on a spectrum. Okay. Opposite signs are not just like, they're completely separate from each other. They actually have the most to teach each other. They have the greatest awareness of each other because they're looking directly at each other. And so, two oppositions by themselves without the aid of those sextiles and trines might be really difficult. But when you've got those sextiles and trines, now you've got different ways for the opposing bodies to be able to have awareness of each other. They have the awareness that is from that direct opposition, but they're also getting support from these other planets who are getting support from the planet opposing them.
That's beautiful.
It is like a community connection. So yeah, I feel like there is, I do like what you said about there being a gift within it. It kind of looks like a package when you look at it. And at the same time, that gift it requires some work, but I feel like it's a joyful kind of work. I feel like it's, you're getting the lovely flow of the trines, you're getting the community support of the sextiles. You're learning and growing through this process without the growth by painful life lesson that seems so predominant sometimes. This is kinder life lessons.
I like that. That's beautiful. Okay. And then we have a minor grand trine with Mercury sextile Mars, Mars sextile Chiron and Eris, and then Eris and Chiron trine back to Mercury. Would you like to speak to that one?
Yeah, so I mentioned the Chiron and Eris trine, and then that Mars sextile before. So this combination, when Mars and Mercury are together, getting that, supporting each other through that sextile, then our thoughts and our actions tend to be in a better state of alignment with each other. We're not operating at cross purposes. We're more likely to be walking our talk under these circumstances. And Mercury in that trine with Chiron can certainly make us more aware of and willing to talk about the areas in which we're having difficulty, and also to learn from it. Astrologers like to refer to Chiron as the wounded healer, but Chiron was a teacher to Hercules before he became wounded. He wasn't always the wounded healer. He was a teacher and a healer before the wound, and has lots of wisdom to impart to us. And then when you combine that wisdom with Eris, that's really interesting because Eris, we certainly can associate her with discord and strife, and though she's a warrior woman and all of that, but she also has zero tolerance for hypocrisy. She is all about taking down the stuffed shirts a peg or two. And particularly when we're looking at, how are we showing up, and then what are our actions in a social sphere of Gemini. This may be a disruptive energy in the sense that there may be some people who, we decide are too big for their britches and need to be taught a lesson. And we need to be careful that we're not the ones who are getting taught a lesson for being too big for our britches. Okay. But I do feel like it's not an unkind energy. There's not maliciousness involved here. Might even be, some pranking going on.
Well, and our words could be very healing to somebody else that maybe has a wound. And so, through our words, we can be assisting them and teaching them with our words. And it might even be a casual conversation that you have no idea the impact you're having on somebody else.
Yes. And also, I do feel like that Eris Mercury combination, that's two kind of tricksters. Um, and since they're in a kindly configuration, again, I don't think it's like mean-spirited stuff. I think it's actually the kind of thing like, where we can laugh at ourselves maybe a bit, where we can not take ourselves so seriously in the midst of all these other configurations that are going on that, otherwise we might feel a little put upon, but I feel like this minor grand trine helps to soothe that a bit and keep some lightheartedness and fun, even in the midst of things where we're talking about stuff that does need to be healed and does need to be remedied.
Laughter is healing to the soul, is what it brings to mind.
Yeah, definitely.
Fantastic. Okay, so what does Mercury retrograde suggest? Well, to rework, redo, rethink, reconsider, juggling, likely communication with people from your past, reevaluate commitments, reconfirm appointments, great time for research and finding the missing pieces. It's a good time to evaluate your goals, long and short term, and make adjustments to those. Do you want to add anything?
Well, that's pretty spot on. And that's the thing about Mercury retrograde is that, there is sort of this popular attitude about it, like, oh, Mercury's retrograde, things are going to go wrong. But we can actually look at Mercury retrograde as a time to get things right.
Well, and finish up projects that you've been working on.
There's that. But in Virgo in particular, Mercury wants to get things right. How do you get things right if you're not willing to take another look at them? We do so many things on autopilot. So much of the human mind is underneath the surface. It's our subconscious. It's we're operating without actually being aware of our own behaviors. Mercury retrograde gives us a time to re-examine those things and say, oh, wait a minute, I didn't realize I was doing that. Maybe I want to do it differently. So it's a great time to adjust our habits, especially in Virgo. Virgo likes to pay attention to what are our habits. So that's a great time, in my opinion, for doing things like reevaluating a diet, for example, paying attention to our health, paying attention to our physical environment. Go out and touch some grass.
So one suggestion I would have is do not overcommit yourself. Leave some extra time when, traveling to work or taking a trip. Don't be in a hurry. Take some extra time to get there. There can be some, minor delays, but, pack your patience and breathe through it and go with it. Do you have any suggestions?
So consider that minor delays might actually be your chance to have a better time.
I like that. Okay, I have a quote for you. It's all very Mercury retrograde. I heard Paula in HR was going crazy because Seth wasn't returning her messages, and she thought she was going to get fired. But then it turned out that she was accidentally texting a drug dealer with the same name. This is by Emily Segal from the novel Mercury Retrograde. So it's, you got to laugh. I mean,
oh yeah. I'm sure that drug dealer was completely bewildered.
Probably. So come back for more episodes of the Astrology Star Sisters Talk Over Tea. We love to have you join us live and watch later. And other monthly podcasts are episodes that I do with Justin. We do the full moon forecast, the astrology forecast for the month, and a Chiron asteroid series. Simon is on with me once a month. And our next one will be, I forgot to change that. It's not going to be Mercury retrograde. It's going to be Mars, Jupiter, square Saturn. And then the dwarf planets with Sue and the Leo decans with Joy. And I have another one coming up, but we haven't named it, with Marcia Bouchard on the fixed stars. And then I will be on Talk Cosmos on August 4th at 1 p.m. about the Leo new moon. And I'm available for consultations. I have a newsletter and my other social media, so you can sign up and follow on any of those that you like. And Simon, would you like to talk about what you have going on?
Well, as noted here on this on the image before us, I have a Patreon page. I regularly track the transits, giving my readers information about what is going on each week, each month, as well as my public posts for big transits that are happening. I also do custom astrological art for my patrons. And like Liz, I'm a consulting astrologer. So you can reach me to schedule a consultation through my link tree. And I look forward to hearing from you.
And again, to our websites, Simon's website is iconalchemy.com, and my website is alightpath.com. And we always enjoy hearing from you, and we look forward to seeing you on the next show.